obviously that would be a disaster because you can't specialize in everything. You wouldn't be able to get much done, and you would be incredibly poor. The reason why we've created so much wealth around the world in the past 200 years is that we stopped trying to localize.
What are the benefits of free trade? I posed this question to Johan Norberg, an economic historian from Sweden, in a recent episode of my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara. If you enjoyed this analysis, you might want to check out the full interview with Johan Norberg. That's linked in the description below. Enjoy. That there's quite a hostile attitude towards trade in many parts of the world these days, that trade is blamed for high levels of unemployment, for example, in the Rust Belt in the United States. There's a kind of suspicion within Europe around free trade. The EU has quite high trade barriers, even though countries are fairly free to trade internally. So why is there this kind of uptick in sentiment against free trade?
I think this is also a cyclical phenomena. We've always had periods of distrust of trade and of traders. Lord Macaulay in the 19th century said that trade, the greatest blessing for mankind, is everywhere despised by people. And I think one reason is that trade can be a disturber of the peace, because it brings with it competition from other places, so that we have to improve what we are doing back home as well. And some businesses that are uncompetitive, they will go out of business and people will lose their jobs. And that's what we see. That's the immediate consequence that we can see and hear about and read newspaper stories about people the factory that was shut down and people who lost their job there. What's not seen is the longer term effects, the fact that this results in us getting goods and services at a lower price. So it increases our purchasing power so that we can begin to demand other goods and services, better goods and services, and we can invest more in health and education and so on. And then people will be employed in those sectors. This is always what happens in a dynamic economy. We replace old, worse jobs with new, better jobs. And we get a higher level of wealth and incomes generally in the economy. But we don't look at the world long term. We look at the immediate consequences, and especially journalists and politicians, they look at what's newsworthy, and that's the drama. And especially in a period when we've had economic difficulties and we've had a pandemic, history speaks quite clearly in those instances. People become afraid of the world, and when they're afraid of the world, trade is always a great scapegoat.
Yeah, and in many respects in South Africa, we're following that trend. We have a big push for localization from our government, the imposition of tariffs and duties on specific goods. And that just drives up the costs of inputs, particularly where you have global value chains where you're not producing everything locally. That seems to be adding unnecessary cost and barriers to doing business.
Yes, this is a terrible, terrible concept. Of this kind of localization really means that you deny yourself access to this magic machine the trade is. The whole point of that machine is that you specialize in the areas where you can contribute the most, the things that you can do best. And in exchange, you get the things that you need the most. Well, localization means throwing away the machine, dismantling the machine, and instead trying to produce most things by yourself. And we notice immediately, instinctively, I think, intuitively, how bizarre that is when we reduce the level of localization from the nation to, say, the city. Why should Johannesburg trade with, say, Cape Town? Wouldn't it be better for Johannesburg to keep all the jobs back home, and the same thing for Cape Town to do the same thing, rather than being dependent on trade and import competition from the other city? Well, if that's the case, well, shouldn't every city block in Johannesburg do the same thing and focus on that? And if that's clever? Well, why shouldn't every family produce all the things, the clothes, the food, the computers, the books and cell phones that they need, rather than trading with somebody else? Well, obviously that would be a disaster, because you can't specialize in everything. You wouldn't be able to get much done, and you would be incredibly poor. The reason why we've created so much wealth around the world in the past 200 years is that we stopped trying to localize and started to benefit from ideas and production methods and technologies from other places as well, so that we could enhance our own.
So, Johan, we had Stephen Davies of the Institute of Economic Affairs on the podcast, and I know you're familiar with his work. And I'm
a great fan of his work.
One of the concepts that we spoke about, Stephen and I, was that perhaps economists, advocates of free markets, have been a bit too glib about the political and social consequences of this Schumpeterian disruption and creative destruction that happens. And, obviously, politics is a reality. Politicians are operating on short-term electoral cycles and could be driving some of this blowback against free trade because of some of these short-term effects. So I get what you're saying, that longer term, you're going to have increases in prosperity, and that's good for everyone. Rising tide is lifting all the boats. But how do you solve that short-term conundrum? Is that just a communication problem, or could there be other remedial actions that governments or organizations could take to soften that blow?
Well, let me be very specific here and about what I'm saying. I'm not saying that trade has a bad effect short term, but a good effect long term. That's not at all what this means. It means that if you focus on the short term dramatic effects, then you will think that it's bad, because you only see the things that are being destroyed by creative destruction, the things that we stop doing when we begin to do new things. But even in the short term, I would say that this is incredibly important to everybody, to the whole economy, because what it means is that we get on the net, not for everybody, not all the time, but for most people, better jobs, cheaper inputs, so that our businesses become more competitive. More specialization means that we will get better jobs as well. And whenever we shut that down, we'll live with the consequences of more stagnation and of bigger problems. So yes, you can always say that if we were to stop this kind of competition, say in manufacturing of these particular headphones, you might save one job short term in that industry, and that's what we see. But you immediately lose other things. You lose the purchasing power of people who would buy those things at a cheaper price, so that they cannot no longer afford to buy things from other businesses, other domestic businesses as well. It's just that we don't see those jobs in the same way. And the difference is we then lose jobs in the businesses that could have been competitive and successful and helped us to create a stronger economy short term. And we sacrifice those jobs for jobs in sectors where we're not as competitive. But yes, I think there is a point. Davis has a point, and you have a point, in that there are obviously always people who suffer from any kind of change. It's not necessarily related to trade. Most often it's technological change. That's the most dramatic cause of job losses. And other things that we can do, yes, because with more trade in a more dynamic economy, we also get more resources, so that we can help those people to get new jobs and give them some safety, some security in the transition. But then it's incredibly important to think about how we do this. Because we're not supposed, I don't think we should try to protect jobs. I think we should try to protect people. If we try to protect jobs, it just means that we subsidize the worst and most uncompetitive businesses that are a drag on consumers and taxpayers. But we can protect the individuals who lose jobs in those sectors by giving them some resources to retrain, to move to another job if that's necessary. The old Swedish trade unions used to talk about it as the security of having wings, not the security of just getting a handout or just staying in your old job, but the security of having wings so that you can fly to other more competitive sectors so that you get a more sustainable and a better job long term.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this short extract from my podcast, you might want to watch the full episode that's linked over here. And you can also subscribe to my other channel that's linked over here. Please do also leave your thoughts in the comment section below. My name is David Ansara. This is the CRA. Until next time, take care.